hello everybody. So we are really pleased to have you here today with great panelists. So maybe just in a few words, I'm going to present you the panelists, and then we will have the possibility to exchange around our main topics today related to media and information technologies, a double-edged word for women's advancement. So today we have with us Sheila Dallas-Katzman. She's president of the US chapter of the EAWRT and chair of NYC for CEDAW. We have Mona Eltawi, American-Egyptian journalist. She's a New York Times editor and human rights activist. We have Masih Alinejad. She's an Iranian journalist and writer, and she got the Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy Women's Rights Award. We have with us also Matthew Caruana Galicia, ICIG member, data journalist and Pulitzer Winner Prize. We also have Courtney Raj, she's the advocacy director of CPJ, and Nadine Hoffman, the deputy director of IWMF. And I'm Sophie Busson, I'm in charge of advocacy at Reporters Without Borders. So, the idea would be to have today a discussion regarding the difficulties to cover women's rights issues, the difficulties also for women journalists to do their job. And maybe just to start, I will give you some if you are interested, but I was thinking to present the new report of Reporters Without Borders entitled Women's Rights Forbidden Subjects. So this report focuses on the forms of harassment and exaction that journalists, both men and women, can encounter when they cover women's rights. And it's based on several months of research, and it shows that it is now still very dangerous for journalists, and especially women journalists, to cover women's rights issues, that this violence very often, unfortunately, happens in a total impunity. Cyber violence is the most common form of abuse we report in, and of course that women journalists are specifically targeted. We can see this phenomenon in many countries around the world. We saw that in more than 20 countries. Of course, it's more, but in the report we report about 20 country situation where it's very difficult to talk about women's rights issues. And we can see that you have different predators, as we like to call them in RSF. You have radical group, religious group, mafia, also authoritative regimes or web user and trolls that try to target and commit violence against women journalists. And of course the consequences are very important. We see some massive exile of women journalists in some countries, like we reported in Afghanistan the last 2 years from 2015 to 2017, 100 Afghan women journalists decided to quit their job. Some of them so stopped working, and fortunately many women journalists also resist all over the world and decide to continue their work despite the threats. So today we have the chance to have with us several journalists, men and women, who could testify about the situation. And the first question we could ask is, why is it so difficult? Why is it sometimes dangerous to cover women-related issues? And what are the main threats for journalists working on such topic? And maybe I can ask Sheila Dallas-Katzman your point of view on this.
Hello everyone, I'm so happy to see so many people here, and familiar faces too. How many journalists are in the room though?
Yay!
Wow, very good. To answer your question about the female journalists and why is it that they, I want to say, come under fire all the time, the threat. I think there are several factors. One, it's the patriarchal system in which they reside, in which they live. Two, it's the cultural norms and mores of that culture. region or whatever it is, where women's roles are defined, or restricted, and women are not supposed to do certain things. In terms of the coverage of women's issues, you're not supposed to talk about women's issues. For instance, let me just be blunt and say, we can't even talk about menstruation, which is a normal, everyday part of life, because for women too, who grew up in this society, how dare you? You know, you can't report in this. Girls are going to schools, they're having their periods, they have no sanitary napkins, and you can be killed for reporting on these sorts of things, because then it brings shame to the family. And they don't want that to happen. I bet you never thought about that this could have happened. There in some cultures, what I find, the elderly, you can't really talk about the elderly. You can't photograph them, for instance, right? I know that in some Middle Eastern countries, you can't take pictures of old ladies, even if you see a situation where this should be reported, this should come to light. I see some people shaking their heads. You can't do that. And if you are a woman who would be more sensitive, and you want to do it because you can relate to it as a woman, then you come under fire. Because not only the men are coming after you, you know, remember that the women who are so trained, who train the men to be the way they are too, are going to come after you in some regard. So this is where the danger lies. And how do we fix this? We have to fix these systems with policies. Put policies in place for change and a different structure that is going to make it a safe place for everyone.
And Mona?
I wanted to ask you, because I know you encounter many threats yourself, and maybe you could tell us a little bit how did you deal with it? What kind of threats and how did you deal with it?
Sure. Okay. So I need to turn this on. Hello, everyone.
Is this working? Yes. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming and thank the organizers for this really important panel. I don't think we have enough time for me to tell you about all the threats that I get, to be honest. It is really awful out there for women journalists. It's awful online in the so-called virtual world, and it's awful in the so-called real world. And for me, both of those worlds are very real, because I spend a lot of time on social media, specifically Twitter. And on Twitter, on any given day, I am called everything from an ugly lying whore, to an Islamic terror bitch, to a Zionist agent, to who paid you, Turkey or Qatar, all kinds of political accusations, depending on who I'm criticizing. So I'm attacked by Trump supporters, I'm attacked by Muslim men, I'm attacked by atheists, I'm attacked by, like I said, any group possible you can imagine. But in these attacks, while some who don't spend so much time online might shrug off as, well, it's just social media, it's just in this virtual world that doesn't really exist, they have real repercussions in the real world. And in the real world, when I write something, for example, about the Egyptian regime, I hope no one here gets offended because I say the word fuck a lot. And I say the word fuck a lot because I'm very angry, and I have a lot of reasons to be angry because of all of this that happens. The Egyptian regime is a fascist regime, and I call Donald Trump a fascist fuck. And the Egyptian regime is one of the best allies for Donald Trump. And I'm doing this as a kind of like a preamble to explaining the threats that I got just last year. So after Donald Trump was inaugurated last year, I'm a columnist for the New York Times. I'm not an editor. I'm a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times. So on the day of the inauguration, the New York Times asked columnists around the world to write about the inauguration from where they are. And I live between Cairo and New York City. So I was in Egypt and I watched the inauguration with Egyptian friends, and I sent in my column from there. And I headlined my column, "The American Sisi." because Donald Trump reminds me very much of my dictator in Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, an ex-general who, when he was head of military intelligence, oversaw, as head of military intelligence, the sexual assault of women revolutionaries in the form of so-called virginity tests. So this was the headline to my piece. Within 3 weeks, my photograph was on the front page of an Egyptian newspaper, and it was a photograph not just of me from a coffee shop or a restaurant, but it was a photograph of back in 2011 when both my arms were broken by Egyptian riot police. So I was a protest, I was covering a protest near Tahrir Square in November of 2011, and Egyptian riot police were sent to get me. They knew who I was. They beat me, they broke my left arm, they broke my right hand, they sexually assaulted me, and I was threatened with gang rape. And I was detained for 6 hours by the Interior Ministry and 6 hours by military intelligence, during which I was blindfolded and interrogated. And I was denied medical care for 12 hours. So when they put the picture of me on the front page of an Egyptian newspaper, from the days when both my arms were in a cast, this is to send a message. We did this to you, and we can do this to you again. And not just that, and this is where it becomes not just the threats from the regime, which male journalists also experience, of course, but this is where for women it becomes sexual. And it becomes a form of sexual aggression and sexual violence. As I told you, I was sexually assaulted and threatened with gang rape. They called me a sex activist. Now, I write about sex and sexuality, and I proudly write about sex and sexuality. There is no shame for me when I write about sex and sexuality. But when a pro-regime newspaper in Egypt calls me a sex activist, this is code for slut. This is code for this woman is a whore. And this message was completed, just because I will tell you more as the panel progresses, last year, again, at the end of last year, in November, when there was an attack in Sinai on a mosque that killed more than 300 people. I wrote a column for the New York Times in which I criticized Egyptian regime policy in Sinai, and 2 days later, on Egyptian television, a very famous and well-known TV presenter called me a prostitute, said that a dog had more honor than I had, and broadcast an interview in which I talked about my book, which is so the title of my book is Headscarves and Hymens, and the subtitle is Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. So this man called me a prostitute, said a dog had more honor than I did, and played a clip of an interview in which I explained what my book is about and what the sexual revolution is, by way of explaining how I'm a prostitute. So, the attacks are online, in which all the groups who don't like my work, because I fight misogyny, I fight patriarchy, I fight racism, I fight homophobia, I fight classism, because my feminism positions itself to dismantle patriarchy, whether it's religious, or racial, or class, or gendered, or any kinds. So all those groups who don't like women, who fight patriarchy, attack me online, and in the real world, the attacks have been on my body and on the bodies of many other women. I'm not the only journalist who's been sexually assaulted. As I said, at least 17 women revolutionaries in Egypt in 2011 were subjected to virginity tests, which are forms of sexual assault, and we hear regular reports from activists in Egypt about the sexual assault and the rape of women in Egyptian prisons. There are 60,000 political prisoners in Egypt today. So that's just to give you an idea of what a wonderful life it is for women out there.
Masi, I saw you were nodding when I was talking.
Yeah, I wanted to just say that, can you hear me? Is it on? Actually, I got expelled from Iranian parliament just because I was so loud. Is that good? No? So I don't need a microphone, I'm really loud.
I was just listening to my sister, and I wanted to say that I'm a little prostitute in Iran as well. So
Prostitutes of the world unite.
but I have to admit that first, when I was called a prostitute, I cried a lot. Let me tell you my background. I'm a journalist, but I grew up in a traditional village, in a small village. And when I was a parliamentary journalist criticizing the government of Iran about, their salaries, their pay slips, instead of answering my question, they were just pointing out to me and saying that first cover your hair, that's big hair, it's impossible, and then ask your question. Because for women in Iran, hijab is compulsory, and if you don't cover your hair, then you won't be you won't be able to get a job, you won't be able to get an education, you won't be able to live in your own country. So if you don't cover your hair, you're a prostitute, according to the government of Iran. And there was a cleric running after me in the parliament and calling me a prostitute. First cover your hair, then ask your question. I remember that I was a single mom, hiding my son and because being a divorced woman in the Middle East sometimes, they count you as a second-class citizen. You are already a second-class citizen if you're a woman. But if you're a divorced woman, it's really worse. So I have to hide, to be a mom in itself in secret, and not telling my colleagues, the MPs, the member of parliament, that I am a single mom. Then I was reading the news that saying that Masih has a relation with a man called Puyan. Why? Because my son's name was Puyan, and my blog, my email address, everything was under his name. And they were writing that on the newspaper. So I used to cry a lot. And when I became really powerful, because for me it's really important to show the other side, that how we deal with it and how we get empowered, I started to write about it. Everything that they called me, I named myself that loud. So you calling me a prostitute? Yes. If defending human rights means a prostitute, I am a prostitute. They even were calling me ugly duckling. I said, yes, because you don't know the end of the story of ugly duckling. And when I left Iran, I started to, because if you're a journalist, they kick you out, or they ban you from being a journalist, or you have to do self-censorship. Although we have a lot of amazing journalists inside Iran who are still in prison or fighting back the government, but I prefer to leave Iran and be loud. So I came here and I launched a campaign called My Selfie Freedom, because I knew that when they want me to get out of the country, that means they want me to keep silent. So I said that it's only me, I cannot do anything. Let's get together. I started to film myself, and when I was sad, I started to cry and film myself and talk from my heart. And when I was happy, I started to dance and film myself. So I filmed myself every day, and I told all my audiences, the women, that what scares the government of Iran? Talking about yourself, about your emotion, about your body, about your feeling. They are scared of journalists? Let's all be journalists. Let's all together write about ourselves. Let's all together break the censorship. So I launched a campaign called My Selfie Freedom, which means women get together and talk about everything that you're told not to do, everything that you're doing in stealth, in secret. Like we are banned from singing solo. Let's singing together and film ourselves. We are banned from dancing. Let's dance together and film ourselves. We are banned to show our hair. So let's just, show our hair, take off our headscarf and film ourselves and publish it online. So I was nobody here, but now my campaign has got 1 million followers. I'm not alone. There are many of me. They hated me. They shamed me. They called me prostitute. They called me ugly duckling. But I found my window. They kicked me out from my country. They couldn't, take Iran out of me, my country out of me. So my mother used to tell me that every time when you were a child, somebody kicked you out from a room and locked the door, you were able to find a window and get yourself into the same room through a window. Now, social media is a window for me and many journalists who live in exile. I am there in Iran. In my small village, I was the one watching the clerics, the government of Iran, always listening to the decision makers who were talking about my body, my personality, my identity, my life, my faith. But now, they are watching me. They are listening to me. The clerics, the policy makers, and they all know me by my name. But of course, they have different names. Prostitute, the MI6 agent, the agent of Zionist, ugly duckling, the agent of Donald Trump, although I'm the victim of a visa ban here. And I don't have anyone here except my son in the UK, and I cannot visit my son. But the government of Iran called me the agent of Trump. But I want to tell you that as far as they're going to name you and shame you and threat you, when you talk about it loud, the fear is going to go away. And when you ask women to not be ashamed, then the government of Iran, or those government who attack you, or those people who attack you, they are the one going to scared of the women. Now my campaign is not just only me, and there are millions of women in Iran. They're taking off their headscarf, the white headscarf. They put it on a stick and wave it in public. I'm sure that you heard of that. So this headscarf, which they forced us to wear it for 40 years, now just waving it can scare the government of Iran. This is the power of the women.